Hey everyone, this is Mike, and today we're talking about healer DPS. At first I wanted to throw tanks into this as well, but then I realized that isn't relevant anymore because tank stand isn't what it used to be. For those interested, before Shadowbringers, your tank stance would make you more tanky, but it would also reduce your damage output, so a good tank would know how to mitigate damage and keep aggro without the need of always being inside of their tank stance so that they could increase their DPS, whereas other tanks would just sit in their tank stance all day and thus lose a lot of damage. But that's not what we're here to talk about today. We're here to talk about stuff that is still relevant, and healer DPS is. I feel like it's always a hot topic within the community, as the opinions on this can be very divided. My stance on the matter is that you should DPS as much as you can without sacrificing your party for it. You're still a healer after all, and keeping your party alive should be your top priority, but because of how Final Fantasy XIV is designed, in both job and encounter design, you are encouraged to try and deal as much damage as you can, and there are a few reasons for that. First of all, healer damage is high. In some games healers might not do that much damage, but in 14 healers do about as much damage as tanks. If you really optimize your healing with your co-healer, then you can do even more damage than tanks, but for the average player you should be somewhere around just below the tank players, at least in terms of raid DPS, unless you're playing white mage because those don't have any raid buffs. But point being, healers deal a lot of damage, and this damage is important when we're looking at fights that have an enrage, because once there is something like an enrage at play, any DPS that you can get will be valuable. Just look at the pars over here. As you can see, both me and my co-healer were doing almost as much DPS as our tanks, and we didn't even coordinate our healing because it was my first time healing Savage in a very long time, so we just winged it. But I imagine that this is also how most people playing in Party Finder or casual healers will play at the beginning, because there isn't always as much coordination going on. Secondly, encounter design is also built around your healer kit, and every healer has some sort of free heals, as I like to call them. White Mage has lilies and off-global cooldowns, Scholar has the fairy and the Aether Flow stacks, and then Astrologian has a wide variety of off-global cooldown heals, so you generally want to be using those before you start using your GCD heals, like your Suckers and your Medicas. And for the most part, you can get away without needing to use those as much, as the damage output of bosses is very periodical, so there are very few fights where there is a constant stream of damage, and on top of that there's usually two of you unless you're doing light party content. But once you head into Party Finder or a raid or extreme trial, whatever it might be, you usually run with two healers, unless of course you want to do a solo healer run where you take 5 DPS instead to kill the boss faster, but in most cases you will have two healers. It does take a little bit of getting used to though. Healing is really easy if all you're doing is just spamming heals, but the learning curve comes from being able to utilize your off-global cooldown healing to take care of most of the healing that is needed, so that you can spend your global cooldowns doing damage instead. And then lastly, doing this damage on a healer is very easy right now, especially in Shadowbringers. Doing the bare minimum takes very little. You have a damage over time ability that you can apply once every 30 seconds, and then you have a spammable DPS action. I know that you can take it further than that by using Earthly Star, Assize, Energy Drain for DPS instead of for healing, but we're talking about the bare minimum here. So once you're done taking care of whatever healing is necessary, you just go back to spamming Glare or the other alternatives. I do know that DPS on healer is something that you need to learn, especially when you're new to the job or to the role itself, and also every time that you go into a new fight, because you don't know what kind of damage output to expect from a boss. So in the beginning you'll probably play a bit too safe and overheal a lot, or you won't be using your off-global cooldown abilities as much and you will rely on your global cooldown healing too much. But as you get more familiar with the job, you will start to use your OGCDs more often and then rely on your GCDs when it is really needed. And that's totally fine. It's part of the learning curve, and as someone who is a very casual healer myself, it is something that I do need to learn myself as well. Whenever I heal with some of my friends that are either healer mains or that just have much more experience on it than me, they usually say that I play way too safe and that I could definitely do with a lot less healing, or let them take care of some of the burden as well. Because it is a team game after all, you're not the only one responsible for the party. You have your co-healer there to help you out, and then there are also plenty of actions that your tanks and your DPS can use to mitigate damage as well. And even then, if someone messes up a mechanic and you can't heal them in time for the next raid wide, it's not your fault that they died. Part of your job as a healer is to make up for the mistakes that other people make, but if you can't save them in time, then that's not on you. They made a mistake that got them in that position in the first place, and it doesn't just go for mechanics, it also goes for healing actions like Sacred Soil, Asylum, Earthly Star. When your healer uses them, they expect you to stand in them to get healed as well, and it might not always be possible to do that, of course, because mechanics go on which might make it so that you can't stand inside of the star, but I've also seen it plenty of times where I place down my asylum and a DPS player is just standing right next to it, instead of just taking a slight step to the left or to the right to go stand inside of it. So if you see one of these friendly AoEs being placed, do your healer a servers and go stand inside one of them, they'll be thankful for it. I do know that playing healer can be a little bit intimidating for some, as it feels like healers have the most responsibility in the party, as they're the ones that need to keep everyone alive. But it's actually not as hard as you would think. I play very little healer, especially in Savage or other full party content, because I feel much more comfortable on the other roles. But every time that I do end up playing healer, I always remember that it really isn't harder than playing any of the other roles once I get into it again. So if you've been hesitant to try out healer or playing it in endgame content, give it a try, and you'll see for yourself that it really isn't as bad as you might have thought at first. If I can do it, then anyone can. So let me know how you got comfortable with healer and whether or not you think doing DPS on healer is as hard as some people might make it out to be, or are you of the opposite opinion where you think that healers shouldn't DPS, and if that is the case, why do you think that they shouldn't? Anyways, that does it for me, so I want to thank you for watching, I want to thank my Patreons for their support, and I'll see you in the next one.